All right, so let's get into the next part of this talk through. What we just talked about was the full stops and the mid stops and why that might be there. We talked about this big dramatic ending to this passage where we have three big full stops in a row. Macbeth says, "I'll go no more," full stop, big dramatic pause. "I am afraid to think about what I've done," big dramatic pause. "Look on it again, I dare not." Um, so why would we have these big dramatic pauses here? It kind of puts a cap on the scene, right? So Macbeth is so overcome with guilt that he cannot bear to look at Duncan's bloody corpse again. So let's start talking about some of the other things that we notice in this passage. First thing that you probably notice is the fact that the word sleep is repeated a gazillion times, right? Sometimes by itself. Sleep, 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 sleep. But sometimes in this phrase, sleep no more. So if I'm reading this passage for the very first time, which I am not, but let's just pretend that I am, my first question that I might ask myself is, what is Shakespeare doing here? Is it just that he ran out of words and he couldn't think of anything better to write, and his publisher said, write as many words as you can? Or did he have an actual reason for saying sleep no more so many times? Because it is a pretty good bet that if a character is repeating a word or a phrase this many times, it has some larger thematic significance. So what might this mean? Well, sleep, if Macbeth is saying that he will sleep no more, right? So this ends, Macbeth shall sleep no more. Why? What are the things that cause people not to be able to sleep? Often because they are up all nights, because they're anxious and stressed and upset. People who are very calm and happy and comfortable, usually those people sleep just fine at nights, right? Whereas if you're a murderer, you may have a very, very hard time getting to sleep for the rest of your life. So part of the reason this is repeated so many times is that Macbeth is despairing at the loss of his innocence, right? He will not be able to sleep a good night ever again because what he has done can't be taken back, right? So this repetition of sleep no more is an indication of how intense this feeling is. He is thinking that his guilt will never leave him alone for as long as he lives. Another thing that I want to point out before we move on to the next slide is this long list. You'll notice that I've numbered these things. So this is a very difficult passage, this first one. But the thing to note is that he's just describing sleep in a lot of different ways, right? He goes, Macbeth does murder sleep, the innocent sleep. So what's one thing that sleep is? First, it's innocence. 2, sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care. 3, the death of each day's life. 4, sore labor's bath. So again, you don't have to understand every word here, but maybe you can catch a word meaning here and there. So sore labor's bath might be sort of an easy one. When someone has been working all day, when someone has been laboring all day, a bath can be a really nice thing, right? It can be something that is nourishing. It can be something that is calming. So he's saying sleep is one of these things that brings people rest and relaxation. The balm of hurt minds. You might know that balm means something that makes people better. So he's in each one of these things describing sleep in another way. Chief nourisher in life's feast. If someone never slept, they would have a pretty miserable life. People need sleep for nourishment. So this is sort of a very long list that he is giving, where he is numbering off all these different things that sleep does for people. And that just makes it all the more brutal, the fact that Macbeth will never sleep again because he will be so racked with guilt. A couple of final things that I want to point out here before we move on. We've got a couple examples of alliteration, especially at the beginning. He goes, methoughts, I heard a voice cry, sleep no more. Macbeth does murder sleep. We got a whole bunch of M's right in a row. That is not an accident. Also, the conflating of Macbeth and murder, both of them happen to begin with the same letter, and that is something that Shakespeare plays on a lot in this play. And then we have antithesis too. We have opposites. We have death and life, right? We have murder and innocence. We have balm and hurts. So why do these opposites exist, and what are they telling us? Well, he's sort of saying that I am the opposite of all good things in the world, right? I am a murderer, and that is the opposite of the innocent, right? I have brought death as opposed to life. I have brought hurt as opposed to healing with balm. So each one of these antitheses tells us a little bit about Macbeth's mindsets.